So, good morning, everybody. My name's Colin Rawlins from Lloyd's Register. I'll be moderating this panel around the fascinating subject of fleet renewal.
Where's the time?
Just before we start, I know there's been a musical theme to some of the panels so far. I wanted to just add to that by saying that I won't be able to attend any of the functions tonight because I'm actually going to a rock concert, which I booked many months ago, for a band called The Darkness, which some of you may have heard of. And there is a connection to that. One of their most famous songs was I Believe in a Thing Called Love. And we're going to try and see if we can believe in a thing called fleet renewal on this panel. So with no further ado, I'd just like to introduce the panelists. First of all, to my left, Filippos Prokopakis, who joined Danaos Shipping Company in 2012. Currently holds the position of commercial director, but I think I've been told on good authority that soon to be chief commercial officer of the group holding company. So congratulations, Filippos.
Thank you, Colin.
To Filippos' left, we have Frederik, who joined Maersk Tankers in 2013 and is now, since last year, managing director of a green tech business founded by Maersk Tankers called Njord. Then to Frederik's left, we have Simeon Pariaros, who has over 20 years' experience in the maritime industry. He served as Chief Administrative Officer for Euroseas since 2007 and Eurodry since 2008, following the spin-off. To Simeon's left, last but not least, Clemens Toepfer, well known to many of you, or most of you, I think, in the room, certainly in the Hamburg shipping industry and there beyond. Clemens joined his father's company in 1999. Toepfer Transport, and has been there ever since, managing director, focusing on the MPP, heavy lift, and short sea markets. So, with no further ado, no more introductions, we're going to jump straight into the first question. And it's an observation, first of all. We do, and I think this is no surprise to anybody, we certainly seem to be looking at a multi-fuel future. So the question, first of all, to Filippos on my left is, do you see an equal spread, Filippos, across LNG, methanol, ammonia, or other fuels, for example? Or does one particular fuel stand out for you as having the most potential?
First of all, thank you, Colin. Thank you, Mr. Bernoges, for having me here. Well, this is a million-dollar question, and if I knew the answer, I would be a very rich man. We do see going forward that obviously we're going to be looking at a multi-fuel environment, and that would include fossil fuels as we know it now, methanol, ammonia, definitely part of the mix, as well as LNG. But the fact remains is that the IMO has specific targets towards decarbonization. The industry has to work towards these targets, and ultimately we have to find the best solution for it. We all know that LNG is an intermediate solution. It doesn't solve the problem, really. It's still fossil and still has an issue with the methane slip. So that's an issue there. And obviously for the rest of the fuels, the issue is actually sourcing. We do see efforts from especially from our clients, the liner companies, trying to source, for example, good quantities of green methanol. But however, in order to do that and how green that may be, and the quantities being sourced for the future, that is very big of a question mark. So yes, I believe definitely it's going to be multi-fueled going forward. But to what extent and in what spreads and what will be the percentage of each, it's hard to say. Definitely a big part of it will still be fossil, in my opinion, for some years to come.
Okay, Filippos, thank you for that. Frederik, what's your view?
Same question?
Yes, please.
So I think you will see an exploration for sure, and I very much agree with Filippos on that. It will be a mix, and we will see over the years to come what is the right mix, and we won't have one final answer. And I think we're lucky in the sense that some owners, they have taken the opportunity to take a bet and start with the construction without necessarily having the infrastructure in place. That's a bold move, but it is also required. Otherwise, we won't see what will work, and we won't start building the the production accordingly. So no demand, no production out there, no supply. So I think that's a bold move. And for the rest, I think there's a lot who are then waiting and seeing to see what are then the outcomes of the different trials, what works, what doesn't, in terms of safety, in terms of price, in terms of supply. And then we will see the industry reflect accordingly. But it will be a mix, for sure.
Interesting, Frederik. So on that basis, what you seem to be saying is that a lot of the dual fuel, say methanol vessels that have been ordered so far, you see them running on conventional fuel for some time?
I think we'll see it both, yes. But I also think that in order for us to actually progress with this transition, they will start running on methanol, for instance. And I think many of the ones who have made the bet and started building these vessels, they have also somehow invested in the supply chain around methanol. So it will also be in their interest to actually burn the methanol that they've built the vessels for.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Just moving on to Clemens. Same question, actually. Clemens, what's your view?
Well, my view is that I think it's going to be challenging to get the green methanol. And there's going to be methanol around, but actually I read somewhere that when you burn the gray or the blue methanol, it's actually more CO2 emissions. So you have to get the green one, otherwise it's nothing done and nothing learned. So it will be multi-fuel thing, but it will be for many. It's far away. We don't have enough green energy out there to produce the green fuels, and then it makes no sense to use it. So, for the likes of Maersk, I understand that they have a demand next year for 7% of their cargo to go CO2 neutral, and that means 93% of the customers are not willing to pay for it as well. So that's just on the liner side, which is very much, customer driven, and it's more in the public eye. So I'm sure that for many other owners in the bulk market, for example, the demand for CO2 neutral transportation is going to be less than 7%. So
Yeah, interesting, Clemens. Thanks for that. I mean, I suppose one other thing we can't forget is that we don't exist in isolation as a shipping industry. We're talking about competition for green methanol from way beyond just the shipping industry. Yeah. Finally, to Simeon. What's your view on this, Simeon?
I certainly agree that in the next couple of decades, there's going to be a mix in the fuels that the industry uses. I think the dominant role will still be with oil, but with ships that burn essentially 40% less than what the conventional ships burn today. I mean, but the end game has to be something that produces zero CO2, or at least something close to that. And the only thing that can produce that is hydrogen, if it's used, if it's produced with from green electricity. So the key here is to be able to produce abundant green electricity. If we reach that point, then we will be able to say there's going to be a fuel, which probably is going to be hydrogen. But we're far away from that. We need lots of investment in research and development of hydrogen cells, and also we need a lot of money to be spent on green electricity. I think on the second part, the world is going to the right direction, especially Europe is meeting its targets, and they will be able to produce enough green electricity to be able to work on a fuel that actually makes sense. Because all the other things that we're discussing, like ammonia, LNG, methanol, all these solutions do not actually fix the problem. So, yeah, for the next couple of decades, I think the market will test all these alternative fuels until, hopefully, we reach a point where we can use a really clean fuel.
Okay, thank you, Simeon. Has anybody got any more comments about the type of fuel mix before we move on to the next question? There's one fuel, for example, that we haven't mentioned, which is an interesting one in Germany, is nuclear. Does anybody looked into this? Got any particular views on it? I'm just curious.
Well, I didn't look into it, but we had it last year on the Capital Link with Martin Stopford promoting molten salt reactors, and that is, I think, something where there's a lot of hope into that segment. As Simos just said, the fuel for the future, that's not going to be a fuel. It's a different kind of energy source. But if you read about that a little bit, and outside of shipping as well, for the energy production, I think molten salt is something which has a lot of promises.
Yep.
But maybe it's coming. I think Martin Stopford said last year it's something for mid-30s. So we are more than 10 years away from that.
Yeah, that would pretty much fit with what our experts within Lloyd's Register also believe, Clemens. Yeah.
But I have a question on that field. Do we think that there are enough people in the world to be able to handle a nuclear reactor within commercial shipping? I mean, it sounds like a solution. Personally, I'm not against nuclear power, but how can you install a small nuclear reactor within every vessel, or a huge amount of vessels, and find the relevant personnel to handle that?
Well, very good question, Simeon. I think another one that I'd add to that is how do you finance it, given what the estimates are, at least for ships like this? Are we then looking at different financial models rather than people owning a particular ship? Are we looking at leasing with different investors, whatever it may be? But I think the general view, and I think Ella would concur with that, is that there is a lot of research that's been done into nuclear, for sure, and it does have promise, but it is clearly still some time away. And there are, on an emotional level, let's say, concerns too.
Ultimately, someone will have to pay for that transition, and that transition will be a very, very expensive transition going to that zero mark, whether it's nuclear, whether it's methanol, whatever that is, ultimately boils down to whoever pays that bill. And as rightfully said, Clemens said, we don't see that appetite going down the full chain for sure. So we can talk about it, but in the end of the day, if nobody's there to pay it, it's still a question mark.
Sure. One other thing that I've heard from various ship owners and read in various interviews is some people saying that there's not enough information regarding alternative fuels, with reference to fleet renewal at least. So we'll wait and see. To be honest, I sometimes have the feeling that it's not that there's not enough, there's almost too much information. It's about filtering it, understanding it, and working together to try and find solutions. But how do you see it from the ship owning perspective? Maybe starting with you, Filippos. Do you have clarity on what you would like to do? It's just that you feel the timing's not right, or do you also feel you need more information?
For the transition, you mean on an investment perspective? Well, yes, for sure. I mean, there are existing things you can do in the fleet that you have, which for us is pretty substantial. We have almost 70 ships on the water in terms of containers, another 7 ships of dry bulk recently acquired for delivered. So yes, it's an issue. So, the answer is twofold. For the existing ships, definitely you have to try and do something about it. And for, younger ships, the retrofit option is also there, but again, it's the cost and the sourcing of the fuel. Of course, if it's needed, then your customers want to pay for it, or not the retrofit per se, but on a charter basis. That's fine. That's something you can explore. Also, a combination of upgrades on your ships with a retrofit is also something you can do with low friction paints, air bubbles, bulbous bows, propellers, etc. So that's one thing on the more eco space ships that you have on the water. For the other ships, which are still the majority, I would feel, still again, you can do these upgrades, which we as a company do. But in the end of the day, I think it's equally important for companies to invest in the people and the R&Ds into R&D's department. We have done so for more than a decade, because it's very important to actually invest in these retrofits, upgrades, whatever call it, but actually monitoring the changes, monitoring the savings, monitoring the impact, and act when that doesn't work is also imperative. So I think that's a third dimension we should put in the mix for sure going forward.
Interesting, Filippos. Okay, thank you very much for that. Maybe moving on to our next question, and I'd like to address this one first of all to Frederik. We've kind of started talking about it already, but how big a role do you think upgrading and retrofitting of existing vessels is going to play in the energy transition?
So I think the short answer here is that there will be no energy transition if we don't see a significant upgrade efforts on both existing vessels, but actually also on the new buildings that are coming out. We've talked about it in this panel already. We talked about it in the past panel. The new fuels are not just around the corner, the long-term solution, and regardless, we will see that the new fuels are much higher priced, and the density of the fuels will require higher volumes to travel the same distance. So you need to make the vessels as efficient as possible. And maybe if we stick to the music references, then I would quote Elvis Presley and say, when it comes to energy efficiencies, it's now or never, because it has to be. And what we see from Njord's perspective is that there is a huge gap, and I think it's great to hear from Filippos that you've started to look into this and you're looking at your fleet in terms of how you can upgrade it. But we see that there's a huge gap between what you can do on existing vessels and also what is being deployed on new buildings versus what can actually be done. There are more than 30 different technologies, solutions out there. You mentioned a lot of them, Filippos, already, but 30 different things you can do. And I think one of the constraints is probably knowledge and also clarity on the business case. We also talked about financing, and Filippos, you mentioned also data, insights into what works and what doesn't. And what we've tried to do, at least with Njord, is to use all the experience that we've gained in the Maersk fleet over the last many years to say, okay, how can you combine several technologies? How would they work together? And how can you make a combined holistic approach to energy efficiency solutions that really works? If you do that, if you have that combined approach, then adding the paint, adding the propeller enhancement, looking at air lubrication, looking at wind-assisted propulsion, or just as simple as putting LED lights, then you can actually have a high savings figure because you combine your way out of it. And some of the, you could say, long return on investment technologies will be offset with some of the short return on investment opportunities. And we see at the moment, in average, 12% savings opportunities on the vessels we work with. We've worked on more than 200. And the payback times are typically around a year and a half. And we talked about the EU ETS before. We can always discuss who pays, but if you add EU ETS into the return on investment linear, then you would actually see that you can shave off additional months. So there are some good business cases, and it's now or never.
Okay, thank you very much all for the also for the further musical reference. I expect at least one from the rest of the panelists as we go along, so get thinking.
No pressure?
No pressure, no. But same question of Frederik, first of all. Thanks for that. But same question maybe to Simeon at the end. What do you think? How big a role will upgrading and retrofitting play in the energy transition?
Was it for me or for you?
Yes, for you, Simeon.
Well, I think retrofitting will be important where there is economic sense. I mean, changing, for example, to LED lights a ship that's 20-year-old, and then scrapping the ship in 2 years will cause more damage to the environment than not doing anything. So where there is economic sense, yes, I think it will play a vital role. For example, I mean, we, in cooperation with our charterers, who might even pay the bill at the end of the day if it makes sense for both parties, we do upgrades like, as Filippos initially described, changing the propeller to a lighter one, painting the hull of the ship with silicone paints and stuff like that, which produce 5 to 7% less consumption, are things that are happening, and they make a lot of sense, and they will happen as we progress. But as I said, you have to be careful. There are many things that you can do just for appearances, and this is just a waste of money, and you are actually damaging the environment. It's a dynamic process. The market will dictate the decisions at the end of the day, because you have to forecast a market to see if it makes sense to retrofit a ship and spend the next amount of money in retrofitting that ship. So it's a very dynamic decision, but retrofitting will play an important role going forward.
Simeon, you mentioned charterers there in those comments. And I'm just curious, do you see any change with the attitude of charterers in general? I know it's a generalization, but any change in the attitude or to their preparedness to help with this? Are they encouraging you to do it? Or?
They are encouraging us, of course, and where there is economic benefit, they are more than willing to participate themselves as well.
Yeah, okay. I can see people nodding here. Well, Frederik?
Yeah, even to the extent that we've seen charters reaching out to us to push owners. I mean, so I say we really want to do this. We are ready to partake in the financing. So let's look at what's possible to do, and let's get moving. So I think there's been a very positive change of mindset.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Clemens, I'm just curious, you obviously have a lot of discussion with many different ship owners. What's your take?
My take in short is, as long as we don't have abundant green energy, retrofitting is the key thing. So I think it's very important.
Yeah. I mean, actually, just curiously, the Lloyd's Register issued a report recently called the First Movers Platform, and one of the slides on that was an estimate for different fuel types as to what percentage of the existing fleet will have to be retrofitted in some way to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And depending on the fuel type, but the average was, I think, something like 27, 28, 30%. Yeah. So, it's a massive undertaking, and it clearly is a lot to do. But what you were mentioning before, Frederik, about the various different things that people can do and save 1% here and 2% there, it seems to me a little bit like an investment portfolio, a well-balanced investment portfolio, rather than assuming that one particular solution is going to solve everything, that people are spreading their investment across 10, 15, whatever it may be, different things.
There's no clear answer to, so we've been asked the question, so what is the winning energy efficiency technology? There's not a one. It's definitely going to be a combination. And I really much agree with Simos on that it needs to be a business case, an individual business case for the vessel. So what is your strategy with this vessel? Do you have it on TC for another 7 years? Then let's look at what can be done in terms of payback times within that period of time. Does the vessel have a poor CII rating, and is the end customer pushing for a higher CII rating? Then let's look at what kind of combination will take you from a D to a C, for instance, right? Given the same operational pattern. But it's going to be very much an individual assessment where you open up your portfolio and then you select from that and say this will be suited for this vessel specifically. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Filippos, I can see you nodding.
I mean, yes, there's no one solution for every ship. Every ship has a different profile, trades differently, it has a different age profile as well. It doesn't make sense to do everything the same for all the fleet. As I mentioned before, there are eco ships which have a longer lifespan. You can do more and invest more. You have kind of the middle-range aged ships, which we said, and Simos touched upon as well, on the things that you can do to retrofit and make them better. And yes, you have to act, and you have to act now. And then, of course, there are the much older ships, which as soon as charter finishes, I mean, if it doesn't make a business sense, it doesn't make any business sense. But definitely to touch upon what the other said on the charter side, I mean, there's, from our perspective, there's big willingness either to contribute directly in an investment or indirectly by extending charter parties or even commencing new charter parties on a longer basis retrofits that we do. And us as a company would like to control the retrofits we do because we're monitoring, exactly as I said, the performance of such retrofits. And we think that, in the end of the day, that's what we provide to our charters. So, but the appetite definitely is there from their side as well. Yep. Ultimately, for us, pay the bill, right?
Yeah. Just a follow-up question to anybody who feels like stepping in. Going back, 15, 20 years, my experience in the shipping industry, at least in Hamburg, was that that was a period where many owners believed that they could handle more or less everything on their own, that they didn't necessarily need to cooperate too much, that they were capable in-house of handling the problems that they were facing. I think it's probably fair to say we're living in a different era now where the problems or the challenges, let's say, have become so large that it's much harder to follow that isolationist strategy, let's say. But do you also feel that as an owner, for example, charterers, anybody involved in it are more willing to cooperate in common solutions? Because I can see that's a change that's happened here for sure.
For our, cooperation is key, and it didn't start now. It started like a couple of years ago. Data sharing on performance monitoring, people having their own systems. Definitely, it's not something of today. It's something that has started for quite some time, and it's imperative. And taking into consideration, especially on time charters, the fact that the charterer has tells the ship where to go and where to trade, actually discussing with the charterer and actually optimizing that operational profile in order for the ship to achieve the best performance is mandatory and key. Otherwise, the whole thing does not work, irrespective of what retrofits or whatever you can do on them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Filippos. Just moving on now to another question. I'd like to address this one to Clemens. And it is slightly connected to regulation, and it is probably safe to say that we can expect more regulation going forward in the shipping industry. It's a challenging environment, but Clemens, do you see any commercial opportunities that might arise out of what we're facing?
Well, I think there's a big jungle out there right now, and the whole EU ETS as one key thing is a big jungle. And there are many opportunities, business opportunities around that, whether you're trading it, whether you are also the counterparty risk. I've been thinking about, you have your receivables on, someone's going to pay you in September next year, or well, next year in 25. You have a Chinese charterer. Are you willing to sit on that until September 25 if he doesn't pay you right away? When you have MSC, then MSC is most likely going to pay you. But we discussed it in the break as well. Someone said most likely MSC is going to have about $1 billion worth of EUAs to give out. So it's a big business, and people are buying already the EUAs. So around that, there's a big industry. There's a lot of software which is being developed. So there's a lot of opportunities. At the same time, when you look at the EU regulations, and particularly coming from Germany, our government tries to regulate a lot and thinks we're going to have the green economic boom coming, which I think is wishful thinking and definitely not happening right now. And the question there is a little bit if this regulation will counter work against this whole nearshoring, which is going on. Transportation will be more expensive, but at the same time, as the production and energy here in Europe, particularly Germany, is going to be very expensive, then nearshoring is not really the option, and that might be good for container shipping in particular. So there's another business opportunity out there. And then looking at the broking side, we see brokers opening up so-called ESG desks, where they're advising clients, and that's going to be for the brokers a challenge, like it is on research, to make money out of that. If it's just an advisory thing, but how on a broker not getting active trading any EUAs or something, but just on the advisory role, how you make money out of that. So that's another opportunity.
Thanks, Clemens. Frederik, just to follow up to you. I mean, I'm guessing, forgive me if you see it differently, but your business in Njord is kind of based on commercial opportunities around this area, green technology. What do you see as the main opportunities for your business or from your perspective?
Yeah, for the regulatory developments, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, what it does at the moment, the EU ETS is putting an ease into the future in terms of what the cost of fuel will be. And putting an extra price on it just improves the business case of deploying energy efficiency technologies. And I mean, what we have done is to you could say, add that into the discussions we have with owners and charters, saying this is the pure business case in terms of if this is how the vessel trades, the consumption profile, the fuel you will be saving, and the capex investment you're facing. If we then add in and say for EU ETS, you trade in Europe, let's say 10-15% of the time, In 2024, you'll see 40% taxation. 2015, you'll see, or 2025, you'll see 70% and then 100% onwards. So if that's the scenario, then what is your additional savings on EU ETS and how does that improve your business case? So we work very much on that. I think what we're seeing with the EU ETS is just the starting point. And if IMO does not change their approach and put some kind of market-based measure on their regulation, then we'll just see additional regional regulations popping up very similar to the EU ETS. It will be much more complex, but we will see a more globalized taxation on fuel in the future, one way or another. When you take a look at CII, it was briefly discussed in the panel before, then although it's highly debatable, then it's also highly relatable. It's easy to understand in terms of the A to E ranking, right? So everyone can understand it to the extent that you've really seen studies that some of the resale values of the vessels out there today are slightly linked to the actual CII rating of the vessel, whether that's fair enough, but it's just reality. So that's, again, one of the things that we see that CII rated A has a premium on the resale value. So it's worthwhile from a business case perspective to improve that.
If I may just quickly add on that, on the CII rating, on the S&P side, it's a nice marketing, and you're right, my vessel is A-rated. I don't see any premiums, really, on that. And Vessel's Value has given a presentation of saying the only impact is if you are an E. And also to add on the retrofits, for example, I think also there on the second-hand market, it's difficult to get a premium necessarily for the retrofits you did compared to a ship which didn't. They're still pretty much the same values. So it's also difficult to get money back if you sell it quickly.
Yep. Okay, makes sense. Thanks, Clemens. Obviously, new building part of the fleet renewal program, obviously a big part of it. Especially in the dry bulk and the tanker sectors, we hear a lot about very attractive supply demand from an owner's perspective because the order book is, the yards are full for the next 3 years, etc. All ships are too expensive. But from an owner's perspective, maybe Filippos or Simeon, what do you think is holding owners back?
Should I start?
Please feel free.
First of all, it is very understandable and logical that the container ships are leading the way in this transition. They are far bigger polluters and consumers of oil, and the existing legislation produce the economics to transition quicker. Now, going forward, I think both tankers and the bulkers will follow. We're waiting to see the effects of CII and EEXI next year, and also the introduction of EU ETS on the 1st of January next year, and the fuel EU 1 year later. I think those two events, along with the effects of CII and EEXI, will trigger orders, far more orders than we see today. And first of all, this will happen because the economics will make sense. Our feeling is that the market will get to the point where such deals make economic sense. We are hearing lately if some dry bulk deals involving methanol orders, but there is not much information around on what kind of employment they have secured, probably from utility companies in Japan or other areas in the world. But as soon as we see the economics, we will be able to tell more. But my feeling is that very soon we will see a huge amount of ordering in both, mostly in bulkers, because the markets are in a different part of the cycle, but the tankers will follow as well. I think we will soon have the economics to trigger a wave of vessels ordering in both these sectors.
Do you agree, Filippos?
Yeah, I mean, I agree fully with what was said before. It's not that they didn't really want to order, it's just that all the slots were pretty much occupied by the liner companies or liner-related tonnage, and we were no exception. We have 10 ships on order. And usually shipping kind of repeats itself and the cycles repeat themselves. Sometimes people say that we don't learn from our own mistakes. As soon as a market picks up, as soon as you have supply-demand balance, then again you have new ordering, which breaks down that balance until you get back to balance and so forth and so forth. Prices is still up. We already see appetite for dry bulk and tanker orders, which will keep pricing up substantially. And one more factor that is in now that wasn't in other cycles is exactly this energy transition. So people have one more reason to do it than before. It's not purely financially driven. It has more attributes to it. So definitely I think this will continue. However, we have to always understand that there's so much time ahead you can look, right? And as soon as a slot is there and it's 2023 and the next slot is 2027, then that uncertainty gap makes any investment a bit difficult. Except if you're an end user, which then it's kind of a different thing. But for owners like us, speculative ordering, that's a bit tricky.
I think I disagree a little bit on the order book. I think bulk has been ordered a lot. We have an 8% order book in the bulk market. It's 11% for Panamax, Kamsarmax size. That's not small. Handy's Super Ultramax is 9%. So it's just the Capes, which are 5%. So I understand why Danaos is on the Cape side. So I think there's a misconception. I think bulk has been ordered a lot, and the tanker wave, which is supposed to come, it's full there. If you just read the third quarter report from Yangtze Yang, which just came out and was published because they're listed, and they took $400 million worth of tanker orders last quarter, and they have, I think, 24 MRs on order. And then Yangtze Yang is not known as the main MR yard in China. So I wonder how many orders the other yards are taking. And product tankers themselves, I just looked it up, is 9.9% product tankers order book. So I think the order books in bulk and tank are sizable, and particularly tank is growing at the moment.
Okay, Clemens, thanks for that. We're almost out of time, but we do have time for one more question. And I'd just like each of the panel, if you, figuratively speaking, to close your eyes and imagine that you were president of the European Commission for a day. What would you change? Frederik, would you like to start?
Yeah, that's easy. And by the way, no pressure again, we're still missing a music reference for the rest of the panel, right? So, but I'll leave that for the panel to just decide. So I think actually, I wouldn't change. I think what has happened with the EU ETS being implemented or being imposed on shipping, I think we're looking into the future of a higher price on fuel. And I think we're on the right path. This is the push that we need. It will resolve into something, as I mentioned before. So I would stay firm and watch the developments accordingly here.
Okay. Watch and wait. Clemens, what do you think?
If I would be president of the EU, you would leave genie out of the bottle. So there you are, with your music reference. I would look into the segment. I think the use of green energy for shipping is not very efficient. You lose around about 8% of the green energy once you have methanol in your ship. And it's 9 times as efficient to use the green energy to replace coal, or 5 times as efficient to put it on a car, because you don't have to convert the green power into hydrogen and then into methanol. So I would find a way how I can, if my green energy I would consume, I put it otherwise into coal or car powers, how I can get a multiple out of it. If it's just twice the CO2 reduction I would achieve with my ship, that's what I would be looking into.
Thanks, Clemens. What about Simeon?
Well, I had a different reply, but hearing Clemens, I fully agree with him. But because I am a politician now and I have to get voted, I have to...
Only for a day, just for one day.
I have to give you a sellable reply. So what I would do is I would try to persuade IMO to adopt the EU legislation, which is anyway the most effective, at least it's leading today what the world is doing in the entire industry. But I think what Clemens says is very correct. I mean, the maritime industry could just increase its share of polluting without causing any damage and focus on other industries that indeed would have a much more significant effect in our environment.
Thank you, Simeon.
What more can I add? I mean, I think everybody said everything. My song would be Satisfaction from the Rolling Stones.
There we go.
And, we just have to satisfy the needs and the goals set already. I agree with Frederik. We have to push towards that kind of timeline and goals, and definitely I agree with Simos. We need a holistic worldwide approach. Definitely we're going to end up kind of in a shit show between different regulations going around the world, which will have the same thing but differently applied. Definitely we need the IMO to step up on that and to have a uniform approach, which will work across the board. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much, Filippos, and thank you very much to everybody. With true German precision, although none of us are German, we've done what they call a Punktlandung. So thank you very much for everybody. It's a great discussion, and I hope that maybe it can be continued during the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin.